Hello, thank you for joining me once again on Shingeki Friday. It is time for Season 4, Episode 15. I'm really actually quite excited to share this one. So this is the last of the podcast type presentation for the post-episode discussion analysis. For Episode 16, it goes back to normal, essentially. Now, unfortunately, I did run into some problems during the reaction. At points, it did freeze up. That was a risk. And unfortunately, it did freeze up for a couple of moments. But, nothing, it wasn't anything that would essentially destroy the reaction. But yes, you'll notice some points that might freeze up for a few seconds. So before I get into the episode, if you're interested in full length for this episode, or maybe even early access to the final episode of Season 4, Part 1, consider checking out the Patreon page. It's just an option for anyone who's interested in content beyond the scheduled content. If you are, check out the link in the description or in the pinned comment. Now, as Shingeki is about to wrap up, just one more episode left after this, there are plans to replace it. The show must go on. So Vinland Saga is the one, or is the anime that is going to replace it in the Friday slot, right? So yeah, that's coming up. I know there's probably a chunk of people that are only here for Shingeki, and that's it. The moment it wraps up, they're kind of done for the moment until Part 2 comes back. So that's fine. That's cool. Thank you for joining me for Part 1, and hopefully you'll come back for Part 2. But for anyone who is open to sticking around and checking out some of the other content, there's quite a bit that's planned. Like I said, Vinland Saga is taking over for Shingeki on Fridays. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is coming in soon. It's going to be starting up in May. So yeah, there's other options if you are interested in checking out other content and sticking around. Alright, that's about it for the intro. I really am quite excited to share this one. So thanks again for joining me, and I hope you enjoy. Oh my goodness.
世界と比べれば鳥かごみたいに小さい。私たちはここからどこにも行けずに死ぬまでここで暮らさなきゃいけない。ああ、エルディア人か。何を？私たちは外出許可を取っているのですよ。
Oh no.
よく覚えておけよ、ジーク。これが外の世界だ。この世界が嫌なら変えなければならない。ジーク、お前がみんなを救うんだ。
This is it, folks. This is it, isn't it?
一人遅れている子がいるが、あの子。
Oh.
またイエーガーか。奴にはその
My God.
も見受けられない。全く何をしに
There
い
he
る
is.
のやら。
Glasses.
今日はジークの好物のパイを焼いたよ。やった
社交ダンスクラブなんて。
Social dance club, yeah.
でも僕はレベリオの健康を守りたいんだ。
これが1200年前に起きたラーゴの。
Oh, that's from the season 2 ending, isn't
ラ
it?
ーゴはこの日のうちに消滅し、
Lago.
進行さらにラーゴから何とか逃れた難民は道なき荒野をさまよった。しかしエルディア帝国はその退路に巨人
Oh, they show that in there too.
共に起き上がった巨人
The pilgrimage.
マーレ人が
わかった。
And the Titans coming out?
死んだんでしょ。エルディア人はマーレ人にひどいことをしたから、僕たちはここで償わなくちゃいけないって。
Did he now?
ジークは戦士になってマーレのために戦いたいのか。
僕は戦士になりたい。
That moment of hesitation.
そうだ。今度は猫の家の本を読んであげましょうね。やった。
That's beautiful. And it's so sad. Oh, Faye.
マジ
Oh no. He's just like Reiner. Look at young Magath.
ジークか。
今日は早く終わったんだ。だから。
おお、そうか。じゃあ、たくさん勉強できるな。ラーゴの惨劇は存在しない。
There it is. Yeah. The opposite.
3階もバレの惨禍も全てマーレに都合のいい作り話に過ぎない。
始祖ユミル様がそのようなことを望まないので、ありえない。
その通りだ。分かってきたな、ジーク。おい、そこの君。
Oh, faithful encounter. Go on, Zeke.
まだ小さいのにやるじゃないか。ナイスキャッチ。
ナイスキャッチ。
ところだ。ちょっとおじさんに付き合ってくれないか。
赤い腕章、あなたは。
君たちが目指すマーレの戦士だ。
ジーク・イエーガーです。
おお、ジーク、どうも君は筋がいいな。きっとピッチャーに向いてるぞ。
ただいま。お父さん、今日ね。
どうなってるんだ、グライス。ジークを戦士
Christ, the OG.
失敗だぞ。
何をしているイーガー。走れ、走らんか。
Grisha, man. Wow.
そんなに戦士になりたいようには見えなかったな。
Magath noticed that. He
や
noticed
らな
that.
きゃいけないんだ。
His grandparents.
なのに全然ダメだった。
無理もない。君は戦士なんてバカらしかったんだ。
Oh.
マーレのために寿命を縮め、他国を侵略するなんてバカらしくてやってられないよな。
Look at that. The Beast Titan himself is saying
な
that.
んで戦士に？
巨人の謎を知りたかったからさ。私は研
I
究
love
者
it.
ね。すべては
Academic
シソユミルが
research.
何かと接触したことから始まるらしいが、
Touch something, just like the
私は
owl
その
said.
時に起きたことを知りたいのさ。この戦争ごっこに付き合ってられない私たち
Isn't
は
war
似た者
terrible?
同士で、この世界じゃ珍しいまともな
He said
者
that.
同士なのさ。
Such a wholesome
こ
fellow.
れでよかったんだ。ずっと収容区から出られなくたって生きてさえいれば。
ついに尻尾を掴んだぞ。エルディアの金のところの手があるらしい。今回はかなりの規模だな。フクロウとかいうナイツ。
Oh no, this it?
すでにいくつか目星はついている。
お腹が。
I mean, Dinah is still. Oh, come on, Grisha.
お父さん、お母さん、もう危ないことはしないで。見つかったらみんな楽園送りなんだよ。
誰かが立ち上がらない限り、みんなずっとこの狭い壁の中で惨めに死んでいくん
It's
だ。
the same thing as Rodrice stepped up to Historia, right?
みんなの未来のための戦いだって言ったでしょ。
ジーク！そもそもフェイが殺されたのはこの世界が狂っているからだ。もう誰もフェイのような目に合わせないためには戦わなくてはいけない。強いエルディアをマーレから取り返し、
Grisha.
当たり前の権利を勝ち取るんだ。
親が復権派だったなんて。
Oh,
親族全員楽園送りに。
they've built that trust, right?
キャッチボールしてくれてありがとう。巨人になっても時々思い出すからね。じゃあ行くね。
告発なさい。
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say.
もうこれしかない。
そんなできないよ。
ジーク、君は両親からひどいことをされた。勝手に見放し、ちっとも君のことを気にかけなかった。君を愛さなかった。ジーク、君は悪くない。君は賢くていい子だ。もう少し手加減してくれよ、ジーク。
ああ、もう年寄りにはきつい
Look
か
at
ら
him.
どうだね。
年寄りにもなれなかったが、研究に打ち込めたことに後悔はない。 最後に集大成を発表できそうだ。
Ooh, compilation.
始祖の巨人がユミルのためにもたらしたさまざまな影響について。
Whoa.
ああ、記憶を操作するとかいう
Whoa. He knows about that, huh?
記憶どころじゃない。体の構造も変えてしまうことができるんだ。
That's new?
しかし、
Whoa.
ある日を境にエルディア帝国からその病は消滅した。
I mean, the founding titan does have
始
amazing capabilities.
祖の巨人の力でユ
Whoa.
ミルの民の体の設計図を書き換えたんだよ。
They did create
ま
those
さに
walls,
私た
right?
ちユミルの民はどこにいようと始祖の巨人の一部のようなものなんだ。
It can kind of recreate their body
ど
in.
うしてまた悪魔を生んだ。
始祖の巨人ならユミルの民が子供を産めなくすることもできるのかな。もしこれ以上ユミルの民が生まれてこなければ
Whoa.
100年後には
Whoa.
この世から巨人は消滅して
Whoa.
もう世界は巨人の脅威に怯えたり苦しめられたりせずに済む。何よりそもそも僕らは生まれてこなければ苦しまなくてよかったんだ。
愚かだった私は腕章を外し、エルディア人であることを隠したまま妻と暮らし子を作った。
Oh.
妻はマーレ人だったんだ。しかしいつまでも騙し通せるわけもなく、
Goat?
私がエルディア人だと知った妻は
Oh
自分
no.
と息子の喉を裂いて死んだ。私が戦士になった理由は贅沢な自殺の方法に飛びついたに過ぎない。だがこの
I'll have to come back to that. That presentation though, it didn't cut to an actual flashback. That's how he carries that.
亡き息子を君に求め、巨人の力で自分の罪から逃れようとした私だってこの世に生まれてこなければ。
It's like the opposite of Eren.
獣の巨人は俺が継承する。マーレのためじゃない。
There it is, his own agenda.
成功させ。
これはマーレに伝えていない情報なんだ。
Whoa.
のちぎりを打ち破る方法だ。図らずともジーク。
It's that music
君
from
だからこそ可能になる。
episode
王家の
10,
血を引く
season
巨
3.
人であれば、始祖の巨人の継承者と接触することにより、その能力
So
を
he knows quite a bit, man. Ksaver-san.
しかし、力を使えるのは君じゃない。決定
Eren
権は始祖の保有者
That's
に
the final call.
いわば君の役割は鍵だ。
Oh,
私たちの安楽死計画を理解してくれる
euthanization plan.
君ならきっと見つけられる。
Ksaver-san.
私はいつでも見守っているからな、ジーク。
見つけてみせるよ。父さん。エレン・イエーガーだと。
はい。エレンは始祖の巨人の保有者です。
The
そし
boys.
てエレンの生まれ育っ
Oh,
た
this
シ
is-
ガンシナクの家の地下室には何か重大な情報があるとのことでした。
He's just finding out about.
エレンから父親の話を何か聞いたか。
確か今は行方不明で医者をやってたと聞きました。
Oh, yeah.
なんてことだ。
That
あの
father.
父親は生きていた。
It's just like as Grisha was screaming and he's
俺
hiding.
たちは被害者だ。お前はあの父親に洗
Oh,
脳
he's
さ
having
れ
a
ている。
breakdown.
少し父親と似てきたよ。
Oh, it. Oh, he looks just like Grisha at that table.
イエレナから聞いた通り、
Oh, beautiful shot.
エルディア人安楽死計画に賛同してくれるのか。
まだ小さな子供たちを虫みたいに潰して回った。感触も残っている。
Oh, isn't that how
その子たち
Grisha?
が生きていれば
Oh,
始祖の巨人は王家の手に渡り、いいや、親父は間違っている。そしてその親父に育てられた俺も間違いだった。この世に生まれないこと、これ以上の救済はない。
Zeke's being used again.
俺の手で巨人が支配した2000年
To you, 2,000 years in the future. Oh, he's being used again, man. He's being manipulated.
兄さん、
Look at this. This is Mr. Tatakai himself. Come on, man.
やろう。
That baseball means quite a bit. That means quite a bit.
必ずみんなを救ってあげる。
Come on, man. Eren. 3 seasons, 4 seasons of Eren seeking freedom, and I was born into this world. All of a sudden, come on, he's being used.
奪ってない。
All right.
救ってやっ
His whole outlook kind of makes sense now.
そいつらから生まれてくる命をこの残酷な世界から
クソ坊さん見ててくれよ
Oh. Oh, hey, so you gotta jump. There it is. That's Heicho's miscalculation. He did not expect Zeke to do that. But I mean, they showed us both bodies. And he's certainly not healed enough to transform. Whoa. Incredible episode. That is the best episode of the season. Hands down. I mean, incredible. But Eren, man. You know how they're talking about, you know, is Eren being manipulated? No. Eren's the one doing the manipulating here. Emotional manipulating as well. Even called him brother. Whoa. Oh, wow. I mean, that is staggering. That episode is... that is easily the best episode of the season. I mean, I think for me, it's a clear-cut episode of the season. And it's an all-timer. It's an all-timer for sure. I'm talking about, like, top 3, top 2, you know, potentially the best episode of this series. I mean, it's certainly a contender for the best episode of the series. You know, it was deeply affecting, emotionally moving, exceptional structure and delivery, right? I mean, everything about this episode, it just resonated. I mean, it was inevitable that I was going to end up liking any sort of backstory episode for such a major character, right? Zeke Yeager. But, you know, given the pedigree of Isayama-san and, you know, the backstory episodes or flashbacks, I mean, this is as good as any, right? It could be the best one of the lot. And there's some incredible ones, right? And some incredible backstory episodes. And this is right up there as one of the best, right? A contender for perhaps the best. And it has certainly cemented Zeke Yeager as one of my absolute favorites of this series, of this story. No doubt about it. I mean, you know, even before this episode, I was already quite a fan of Zeke Yeager. But this episode, my goodness. I'm telling you, man, this is... in my opinion, this is an incredible character. It's such a fascinating and nuanced character, isn't it? You know, much like Reiner, it's a tragic backstory, and he is one of the most tragic characters of this story as well, right? And you know, there's many of them. There's many of them in this story, and you know, tragic upbringings and tragic and traumatic experiences seems to be the norm for a lot of these Eldians, right? Like I mentioned, Reiner just now. And then you have Zeke Yeager. There's a lot of trauma, a lot of tragedy for a lot of these characters in this story, right? You know, I've said it so many times for this story at this point, but everyone has their own struggles. And, you know, having watched Children of the Forest recently and Mr. Browse, and the profound things he had to say, it made this episode that much more poignant, right? As I was going through that episode, as I was seeing the things unfold, you know, I was thinking back to the things Mr. Browse was saying. But yeah, you know, at this point, I'm so invested in Zeke Yeager's character arc and how it potentially plays out as this story heads towards its conclusion. You know, now I say that, but both Zeke and Heicho just got blown to bits from the looks of it. I mean, that was a blast from close range, right? And, you know, Zeke did not recover. No chance he had recovered enough to be able to transform, right? They made sure to show us his feet, and they were gone, right? He was still regenerating. And Heicho was about to cut him up again before Zeke goes through with it, right? And essentially, this was Heicho's miscalculation. He did not think that Zeke would be able to do this to himself, to blow himself up, right? So this was Heicho's miscalculation at this point. But Zeke did it. Now, is this how their stories could potentially end? I think that's quite unlikely, right? I think that's quite unlikely given how important Zeke is, right? But okay, say as a hypothetical, but if he was to die from that, there is a yet to be born Eldian baby, right? Who is meant to have royal blood, or who is going to have royal blood, right? Historia's baby. But again, it's random, right? It is random. There could be another pregnant, or there could be other pregnant Eldians out there, not just one other, many others, right? Who knows? So even if Zeke was to die from this, there's no guarantee that Historia's baby is going to end up getting the Beast Titan, right? It could be a random Eldian baby, as there's no guarantee that Historia is the only pregnant Eldian at the moment, right? But again, just a hypothetical, because I just don't think this is the end for either one of them, actually. I mean, it was quite shocking. It's quite jarring to see that happen, and I certainly feel like both of them are going to be in critical condition. But I just don't see it being the ending for either of their stories. There's just so much that needs to happen still, so much that needs to play out for this to be the end for both of them. But yeah, again, they are going to be in critical condition. Certainly Zeke. I certainly don't think he has enough in him to transform in that moment, right? So it is possible that he could be on his deathbed, right? Critical condition for sure. Heicho, I think he's certainly going to be in critical condition. It's possible he might have lost a limb or two, right? Who knows, man? This is this is the thing I kept dreading. This is the final season, and these kind of things are possible, right? Major characters are going to be in these kind of positions. Now, I don't know how it's going to play out. There's only one episode left. And in that sense, I said, this is the best episode of the season. Yeah, there's one more episode left, but it would have to be an incredible episode to top this one. Right then, how do I even begin to tackle this episode? There's so many different things to talk about here, so many different things to kind of unpack. Like I mentioned earlier, the structure. I absolutely loved the structure of this episode. It's quite an anticipated backstory, right? Quite a crucial one, actually. The selection of events from Zeke's life story was composed into a strategic sequence, right, to arouse specific emotions, right, and really expressed a specific outlook on life, right, or outlook of life through Zeke's experiences. So I really appreciated the structure of this episode. Zeke's external and internal conflict is on display throughout this episode. Struggles with personal relationships, right? With social institutions, forces in the physical world, and, the battle within his own thoughts and feelings, conscious and unconscious, right? I mean, let's not forget the age, right? This is a young child, and, there is some immense pressure on this child, right? And, a specific example, and of course I'll get into it a bit later, but, there is immense pressure on Zeke, right, as he decides to make that crucial choice to give up his parents, right? Imagine having to do that, right? Knowing the outcome, knowing how life is about to end for them. And, like I mentioned earlier, as I've mentioned many times throughout this journey through Attack on Titan, through Shingeki, everyone has their own struggles, right? People are not what they appear to be, all right? Look at Ksaver-san. Oh my goodness, right? More of that later, but yeah, you just don't know, right? You just don't know people's experiences. You just don't know the things they've had to go through. See, here's a clear case of a protagonist or a major character in a story being an empathetic one, right? There's certainly a lot of empathy there, but he may or may not be sympathetic, right? Young Zeke Yeager, I mean, there is so much sympathy and empathy for that child, right? I think everyone's in the same boat, in that sense. But I can totally see how he might not be sympathetic, in terms of older Zeke Yeager, adult Zeke Yeager, right? I could totally see how people could, be sympathetic towards young Zeke Yeager and the things he had to go through and his traumatic experiences, right? But then also be completely against older Zeke Yeager and the things he's done, right? I know a lot of people have a similar outlook on Reiner and some of the other warriors. But, they might not have the same type of sympathy for older Reiner, right? And don't really forgive him for his actions. I can completely see the same type of thing here for Zeke Yeager, because adult Zeke Yeager has done some things, of course. But then, this is the episode that sheds light on that, right? On his actions as adult Zeke Yeager and the thought process behind it, right? I mean, a character and audience are not going to be alike in every fashion, right? It could totally just be a single quality, a certain shared humanity, right? But great writing can make even the most unsympathetic character quite empathetic, right? And I think Isayama-san has done this already in this story, right? Characters like Kenny and Rod Rice. Again, I can only speak for myself, but that's how I saw those characters. Now, through Eren and Zeke, the nature of choice is on full display, right? And it's getting to that point of a choice between, the lesser of two evils in some cases, right? Given the drastic nature of the choices they are making here, right? Of course, I'm going to have a full section about this, right? Their plans and Zeke and Ksaver-san's plan finally being revealed, right? And then, of course, Eren. Again, more on that later. But how a character chooses in True Dilemma is a powerful expression of his or her humanity, right? And the world they live in. Now, going back to the actual subject matter of the episode, once again, masterful use and execution of backstory and flashbacks, right? Once again, powerful revelations come about from the backstory, right? Previous significant events in Zeke's life are revealed at this critical moment of the story, right? To create an explosive turning point, delivering such a rush of fascinating insight, right? As expected. This, like I said, a potential Zeke Yeager backstory had the capacity to be absolutely tremendous, and it lived up to it. It lived up to all of that expectation I had in my mind. And once again, this backstory is presented at just the right moment in the narrative, right? And Isayama-san is a master at this, right? He knows just the right moment for all of this. At the right moment for this type of episode, for this type of story. So revelations of this caliber, right, they tend to have more impact. So they're often reserved for major turning points, usually the climax of an act, right? So yeah, this was just the right moment for this backstory. And like I've complimented these types of flashbacks before, or these types of backstory episodes before, this flashback had more of the same effective presentation, right? A mini drama with its own inciting incident, progressions, and a turning point, right? Again, Isayama-san has it on lock. Backstories and flashbacks. I feel like all of them have been incredible, right? If you go down the list, you think of Grisha's backstory episode, That Day. You think of Ymir's backstory in Season 3, Episode 10, Children. You think of stuff like Season 3, Episode 10 and 11. Again, incredible backstory episodes. And, in this season, Reiner's backstory episode in Episode 3. And then, this one, right? This one, incredible. Let's go to the beginning of the episode, or some of the things that happened in the first half of the episode. Traumatic experiences as a child can have a lasting effect, right? It can shape you as a person. It really can. And it can completely change your trajectory, right, as an individual. And Zeke experienced that harsh reality from a really early age as well, right? And it was similar to the opening of That Day, right? As Grisha spoke of learning or had to face the truth of the world, right? In his young age as well. And, he took Zeke up there to really show him and make them understand the situation they find themselves in, right? A tiny bird cage compared to the world. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Eren Yeager, right? I spoke of the pressures on this young child, and it was from all over the place. It wasn't just, his parents, right? The expectation, even, candidate training. He struggled quite a bit, in that sense. He's quite similar to Reiner, who struggled quite a bit in the candidate training. But, the thing is, Reiner, even though he wasn't quite up to par, right, He found himself a bit of an outlier, just not as good as the others. He actually wanted to be one, right? For his own reasons. But you have Zeke Yeager here, who actually didn't really want to be a warrior, right? That much is clear. And you see Commander Magath, people like Commander Magath, who could see right through him. You know, the commander could tell. He could tell that he didn't really want to be here, that it wasn't an authentic gesture in his eyes. And then, of course, his grandparents asked him the same thing, right? Because they also see that. They understand. And you clearly see in his hesitation that, of course, Zeke does not want to be a warrior, right? There's such an immense amount of pressure on him and expectation. Yet he still, after his moment of hesitation, he tells him, yes, I do want to be one. Again, because of his parents, right? Unfortunately, this child was born into this world with the burden and expectation to be the savior. A child with royal blood, right? Someday this child will lead us all to victory, right? Season 3, episode 20, that day. He was essentially born as the hope of restoring Eldia, right, in his father's eyes and in his mother's eyes. And speaking of his grandparents' house and being there as, Dinah and Grisha go off to their restorationists meet up, they do their thing, or, Grisha's father does his thing, and he pulls out the book, right? He's doing his part in making sure that Zeke is getting the history, right? The right history. Because, of course, he has concerns about how Grisha might be teaching Zeke. And the things he's teaching Zeke are actually quite familiar, right? Because, really familiar. The moment they showed me those images, right, it brought me right back to the season 2 ending. Bit of an iconic ending at this point in time because of how many things keep kind of going back to it, right? Circling back to the ending of season 2. It was depicted in season 2. It was animated in season 2. This tragedy of Lago, right, and 2 other places. It was actually interesting to get details and the relevant names or places attached to those scenes in the ending. Quite a nice little companion to that ending, right, to get some more information on it. And you see that Zeke is covering for his parents, right? He tells his grandpa and his grandma that the Eldians did horrible things to Marlene's, so they have to atone for it, right? And that Grisha was teaching him this history. But of course, Grisha was actually teaching him the opposite of that, right? He presented, or that scene presented the exact same story, but Grisha presents it as completely made up by Marley, right? This tragedy of Lago and everything else that followed. And there was such a sad yet wholesome moment as you see his little face light up after his grandma mentions this cat book, right? This cat house book. And, of course, that's one of the most tragic and heartbreaking things about this episode, that you get to see that this child, he just wants to be a child, right? He wants to do things that these other children are doing, these other kids are doing, right? The lives these other kids had, right? He longed for that father-son connection, right? That bond, that experience, right? That's what he wanted from his father. And he tried, right? He tried, but again, this child was destined for something else. And, before I go any further, yes, it's in Liberio. So yes, ultimately it's not going to be the most normal childhood for anyone. But, some of these children still have connections with their family, right? Their father, that bond. And he didn't have that. He just didn't have that with his father. And you see throughout the episode, or at least in the first half of the episode, that he does try to get that validation, that positive affirmation from his father, right? He wanted to impress him, see him in a great mood or in a good mood, right? And he would say things that he knows are going to bring him affection from his father, right? He would say things about the founder Ymir, she would never want that, right? And you see how much just getting that pat on the head meant to him, right? It's a sweet moment, but it's a sad one as well, right? This is the kind of thing he has to do to get that positive affection. And like I mentioned, he had no interest in the candidate training, right? He had no aspirations for that. Yet he does not want to disappoint his father, right? He wants to impress his father. He wants to make him happy, so he does go through with it. Unfortunately for him, right, he struggled quite a bit. he knew from the things both his father and mother told him, and how much it meant to his father, how important he considered it that he become this warrior. He tried his absolute best for his father, for his parents, because he knew how important this is, right? That's all he's heard essentially all his life, right? That he has to become this warrior, right? He tried his best for their sake, but he just wasn't any good at it, right? He just did not excel in any of that. And, that scene of him asking Commander Magath to allow him to enter open training once again, but then struggling and falling behind yet again, and then looking back over, or looking over at his father on the sidelines, right? And watching him and then walking away. Oh my goodness. I've got to tell you, that's one of the most crushing and heartbreaking moments of the anime. He's absolutely crushed to see his father just turn his back and walk away, right? It's a sad moment, right? It's such a sad moment. It's a heartbreaking moment. And then later at that dinner table, right? The look on Grisha's face. Oh my goodness. The disappointment simply could not be missed, right? Zeke noticed that. He looked right at his father. Yeah, man, Grisha completely just messed up on this, didn't he? I mean, that's nothing new. That's been established since that day. And of course, then there's the freak out scene. Grisha just absolutely freaking out. I mean, before I go any further, tremendous voice acting. That is just staggering. I don't know if it exists, but I would love to see that footage of Grisha's voice actor in that booth. That was just staggering. That was incredible. That was perhaps one of the most haunting and visceral moments of the entire anime, of the entire story. But yet again, another traumatic experience for Zeke, right? To be in that room, to be hearing his father in this state, right? To see how angry he is and how disappointed he is. That Zeke is such a letdown, right? Those are the things that are going through his mind, right? As he's trying to cup his head in his hands, and perhaps, in an attempt to drown out some of that noise. Because it's unbearable, man. Even as the audience, sitting there watching that is unbearable. But at the end of the day, like any other child, Zeke didn't want anything to happen to his parents, right? And, like I said, he would cover for them in front of his grandparents, right? Then at the dinner table, he musters up the courage to tell them to stop doing dangerous things, right? But ultimately, he did have to take the guidance of Ksaver-san. So let's shift over to Ksaver-san. Zeke finally found the thing he was looking for, right? The father figure. He finally found some much-needed guidance and direction, right? And in that sense, Ksaver-san is yet another fantastic impact character, right? I just recently mentioned Sasha's father. Here you have Ksaver-san, who is easily one of the best of the story, for sure, as far as impact characters go. He runs into Zeke, catalyzes him into change, and had a major impact on his life and trajectory from that point on, right? Certainly a mentor character, a figure who guided Zeke into a new world, awakening the qualities Zeke needed to meet the challenges he must face, right? From that point on. And of course, in Zeke, Ksaver-san found a son, right? He also longed for this type of connection, right? Because of his own losses, his own tragic background. So these two just kind of found each other, didn't they? Just the type of person each other needed. And, they had developed such a bond and trust that, he felt safer on Ksaver-san. He felt that trust. So much so that he was able to open up about his parents being restorationists, right? And, that moment of him all teary-eyed, thanking Ksaver-san for playing catch with him. Again, wow. One of the most emotionally moving and deeply affecting moments of the entire story. To see his little face all teary-eyed and so genuinely thanking this individual for just that small gesture. He cherished that kind gesture so much, didn't he? It meant so much to this young child. Man, I tell ya, I had that lump in my throat, that chest pain. Actually, I had that feeling throughout a lot of that episode, man. Like I said a few times now, it's a deeply affecting episode. It's quite sad, and it's quite emotional to see this young child go through these kind of things, right? And that man, Tom Ksaver, he did incredible things for this child, right? Just by being a decent person and offering friendship and mentorship. And at the end of the day, he developed such a connection and bond with this man, with this person who was kind to him, who was decent to him. Showed him that there's more to life than, becoming a warrior. He considered him his actual father, right? That's how much of an effect he had on him. That's how much he appreciated him and the things he did for him. And, speaking of continuing to do things for this child and his future, right? He implored him to turn in his parents, right? In some sort of last-ditch attempt to save himself and his grandparents because they're innocent, right? He tells Zeke that he didn't do anything wrong. And, let's be honest, he was right to suggest that, right? And you could see that it clearly wasn't something easy for Tom Ksaver either, right, to suggest this, because he's known Grisha since he was a young child as well, right? Again, he bumped into them in episode 19, right, season 3, episode 19. So it clearly wasn't easy for him to, suggest this, but it was the right thing to do. He wanted to save this child and his grandparents as well, right? Because they didn't do anything. And of course, Zeke rejected that idea or that notion almost immediately, right? He's like, I could never do that. But yeah, Ksaver-san had to be real about it, right? He was right. His parents failed him, right? They were terrible to him. At least Grisha specifically was quite terrible to him, right? He put him through a lot of mental abuse, right? So yeah, at the end of the day, he had to take his guidance. He had to take Ksaver-san's guidance. But, going back a bit, and speaking of the bond that they had and the connection they built, Ksaver-san just straight up tells Zeke that it's no big deal, right? That he wasn't able to excel and be a front runner as a candidate. That it's stupid for him to be a warrior and shorten his life just to become a tool in Marley's arsenal, right? A temporary tool. A replaceable one. This is literally the opposite of what this child has known his entire life, right? Up until this point. All his life, the one thing he's known is how important it is for him to excel and become one of the warriors, right? And inherit one of the titans. That's all he's known from his own parents. Yet here he is, face to face, with an active warrior himself, right? An actual authority on what it is or what it means to be one, right? And these are the things he has to say to Zeke. And you see Zeke kind of freaks out at first, right? Immediately looks around. And I absolutely loved his reasoning for wanting to be a Titan. Now, again, that was earlier in the episode, before things got a bit dark, and he does tell Zeke about his own past, his own tragic traumatic experiences, and he does tell him that it was kind of like a grandiose thing to do. He's just trying to get himself killed by taking on one of the Titans. But clearly, as an academic, as a researcher, he had an interest in this, to learn the secrets of the Titans, right? So like I said in the last discussion, right, the notion of an academic potentially being a Titan is such a fascinating one, right? And it certainly stands. And it appears that indeed he was able to learn some fascinating things about the Titan history. It all started once the founder Ymir touched something. I'm doing air quotes. So that's the second time someone has now mentioned the founder coming into contact with some sort of thing, right? The owl was actually even more specific about this, right? Some say that she touched the source of all living matter. I mean, that's really specific. But now you have two sources saying something really similar, essentially the same thing, right? And these aren't just any sources. These are Titan holders, right? So they are an authority on this because they are able to get some of those memories or look into some of those past memories, right? And going back to season 3, episode 21, right? Attack Titan. I remember immediately seeing or referencing Prometheus. I should probably build on that in this episode. the beginning of Prometheus, and I'm speaking of the Ridley Scott film Prometheus, if you would like to look it up. And of course, I'm going to go into spoilers, but this is just going to be the beginning of the film. In the beginning of the film, you see the engineer go through some sort of sacrificial ceremony, right? He drinks that black fluid, and subsequently his body gets torn apart, right? Seeding that planet, and they don't make it quite clear if it is Earth, but it is some sort of planet, right? Seeding that planet with fragments of his DNA. So back then, the first time I heard about this, source of all living matter, I was trying to draw a similarity to this active black liquid, right, that the engineer drinks. Now, I think based on that, the thing that Al said, and then, Ksaver-san kind of backing that up by saying, touch something. It all began once she touched something. So I think it's safe to assume that she did come into contact with some sort of organism, some sort of symbiote, perhaps, that changed the founder Ymir forever, right? It made her the founder, essentially. It is one of the biggest mysteries or remaining mysteries of this story, but they have given us these two moments, right? Of the owl saying, some say she touched the source of all living matter. And then you have Ksaver-san, who is a researcher, and, he claims that she also touched something. So, yeah, I think there is enough there to assume. And, the really interesting thing about that specific backstory is that how exactly do you even present that, right? How exactly does Isayama-san plan on bringing that in? There has to be something that would allow for the narrative to head into that backstory, right? A natural point. Because it can't just be dropped in the middle of the final season, right? Something has to lead to it, a natural progression. Because it's one of those backstories that's not attached to any of the current timeline, right? It's from a long time ago. So it's going to need some kind of natural shift into that direction. Now, personally, I think it would have to be through memories, right? And that whole concept of paths transcending space and time. And, like I've mentioned a few times now, going back to season 3, the possibilities or potential of these memories and it being used as an exposition tool is quite a, enticing one. And, I brought this up back around the time Eren first starts to experience these memories, right? And, I questioned how far back they could go. I think that is the natural progression in terms of getting that backstory, right? Experiencing it through memories. So, yeah, again, perhaps that could be possible once Eren and Zeke finally come into contact. Could that finally unlock some really interesting possibilities? I mean, I certainly hope so. Because it will be the first time a royal holder of a Titan, right? Zeke Yeager, the Beast Titan, is not going to become subservient to the ideology of King Fritz, right? So like I said recently, I'm just as excited to see how things play out for Zeke once they do finally come into contact. But again, this goes back to the ending of the episode. It is possible that Zeke is in critical condition and could be on his deathbed after, exploding like that or getting blown apart like that. So again, but I can't not go into the discussion, right? And just kind of let that hinge on, is he going to survive that or is he not going to survive that? And, I still want to focus on Ksaver-san and Zeke because, for me, it's one of the best or one of the most interesting duos of the series. And, the series does have a lot of interesting duos. You think of Eren and Mikasa. You think of Armin and Mikasa. You think of Rainer and Bertolt, right? You think of Annie and Armin. There's a lot of, duos and those relationships, different relationships between different duos. You have Kenny and Yuri, right? You have Rod and Yuri. You have Rod and Kenny, right? Keith Shadis and Grisha. Commander Smith and Heicho, right? You've got Jean and Eren. You've got Connie and Sasha, of course. But yeah, a lot of really interesting duos. But, I really, really like this one because it's, Ksaver-san really does mean a lot to Zeke, right? He did so much for him. So much so that he ended up referring to him as father, right? And then Grisha became that father. I'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, staying on this connection, I love the idea of Ksaver-san releasing a compilation of all of his findings, right, through these Titan memories, the things the founding Titan did to the subjects of Ymir, right, and is able to do the subjects of Ymir. And you see that he has already shared some of his findings with Zeke, right, quite a bit actually. He knew about the founding Titan being able to rewrite or, erase the memories. And then he even told him about being able to change their anatomy, right? Now that's a crucial one. That was the crucial moment, the turning point that allowed Zeke and Ksaver-san to formulate this Euthanasia Plan. Oh man. And then of course taking over as a Beast Titan, passed on a lot of that knowledge, right? As Eren said to Armin and Mikasa, Zeke knows even more about Titans than Marley. But, it goes back to that notion of the founding Titan being or having tremendous and amazing capabilities, right? I mean, that was clear after Rodrice explained that the founding Titan was responsible for turning all those people into Titans, right? To erect those walls. And, Ksaver-san even knew about the loophole allowing the activation of the founding Titan. So, he learned quite a bit. From his tenure as the Beast Titan and the memories that became available to him. But as kind and sweet as he appeared to be, Ksaver-san had his own trauma. An immense trauma. I mean, this is one of the darkest things I've seen in this story, and this is a dark story, isn't it? His wife slit their son's throat, and then her own, after finding out that he was an Eldian. That is just... that is staggering. Imagine having to live with that and continue on with life. And you see, the thing I really liked here, you see in the presentation of that scene as he's speaking of his, tragic past and telling Zeke about it, that scene is not presented as a typical flashback. It doesn't cut to a flashback. As he's explaining these things to Zeke, those things kind of start almost manifesting around him. You see that he constantly lives with that trauma. That he himself was ultimately responsible for, removing his armband and being with that Marlene woman in the first place and putting that into motion, right? That scene of that suicide is so vivid in his mind, and I thought the presentation made that even more poignant, right? Instead of cutting to a typical flashback, those images, that scene starts manifesting. And then, of course, one of the most important lines of dialogue, if only I hadn't been born in this world, right? Yeah, that plays a big part, a major part in how things kind of shape from that point on, right? And, this plan of theirs. And then, of course, then Zeke says it, right? He puts it into motion. I'll inherit the Beast Titan, not from Marley, but to retake the founding Titan and save the world, right? Free the world from the terror of the Titans and free all the Eldians from the suffering, right? And the ones that are yet to be born, save them from that suffering they're going to experience, right, if they are born into this world. And, this actually makes sense of the wording of his proposal that kind of had me a bit confused, and I was actually thinking, is this some kind of translation choice, right? I remember his proposal, the thing that kind of stuck out to me was a solution to the Eldian problem, right? It makes so much more sense now, doesn't it? It certainly makes sense to me. Oh, actually, before I forget and move on, I did go back and kind of freeze frame and look at that scene. So in the buggy, I think it's quite clear, what that's meant to be depicting. You see a dark-haired person and then a blonde-haired person, and then you see a blonde on the ground. But in the buggy, you see that the dark-haired fellow or person is kind of in charge, right? And then the blonde fellow in the back of that buggy is kind of the passenger. So, that in itself is some interesting symbolism right there, isn't it? Some interesting imagery. Now let's get into this secret plan, right? So this was Zeke's secret plan this whole time, This is the reason he was always after the founding Titan. Like I've mentioned for some time now, he always finds himself going after the founding Titan. All roads always lead towards the founding Titan, right? That's been his goal this whole time. So yes, I can finally answer that question I initially brought up in Season 3, Episode 20 that day. Yes, he does have his own agenda. It's not for Marley. It's not to restore the Eldian Empire, but a final solution, right? So use these tremendous capabilities of the founding titan and change the anatomy of every Eldian, right? So they become sterile, essentially, and cannot reproduce anymore, essentially making them the last of their kind, right? Who would slowly just kind of dwindle down, and go extinct. Our sole salvation is Eldia's euthanization. Oh. And, I do think this sheds light on his thought process and how he was so effortlessly able to kill so many Eldians, right? Levi Heicho called him out on this and told him that he has no remorse for all the Eldian lives he's taken, right? Up until that point. He brought up Ragako. And of course he didn't bring it up, but this also goes back to the Battle of Shiganshina, right? He killed a lot of scouts, Eldians essentially there as well. And Zeke's reply was an interesting one, right? You think you know everyone's feelings. Turns out that he legitimately believes that he was saving them by killing them, right? I didn't steal, I saved lives. And the lives of the children they would have buried, right, if they had stayed alive. It's quite a dark philosophy. Let's not, beat around the bush. It is a dark philosophy. It's staggering, actually, but he actually does truly believe it, right? And so did Ksaver-san. And their traumatic experiences kind of led them to this ideology that by doing this they would free all Eldians from suffering and future suffering, right? By sterilizing essentially the entire race. I don't know if this is a translation thing, but it's not really euthanization, right? And of course, as shown in that scene, Ksaver-san was so disillusioned with Eldian existence, right, due to his own tragic experiences, traumatic experiences. He was almost immediately on board, right, with this plan that Zeke brought up or formulated. They wanted to end the potential suffering for anyone, and that they truly believe that this is the more humane option and approach to all of this. And you can see how Ksaver-san and Zeke kind of arrived at this line of thinking. But it's so incredibly dark. It really is. So unethical, right? Much like King Fritz made the choice for the entire, race, the Eldian race, having to atone for the sins and face any type of retribution that they have coming. And, Zeke's plan also takes away that choice, that freedom. King Fritz was certainly wrong for trying to make such a substantial call for an entire race, right? And it's more of the same here, right? It is essentially genocide as well, isn't it? It's a different approach, that's for sure, but it is genocide nonetheless. He's not doing it for Marley, but it benefits them, right? Any potential euthanization plan. Essentially it benefits everyone that's not Eldian, right? And that's the whole point of this, right? He wants to end the suffering and he wants to remove the terror of the Titans from the world. And since it is quite a long-term plan, he said something like 100 years would be sufficient for the last of the Eldians to go extinct, right? Or die out or dwindle down. In that time, the suffering could easily continue, right? How about the Eldians in Marley and other places outside of Paradis, right? Are you going to be able to bring them into Paradis? I doubt it, right? I doubt it. And then, of course, an aging community would fall apart, right? And they would be ripe for an outside attack, for sure. There's no guarantee that there's no more outside attacks, right? I just don't think anyone's going to care that, they've made this change, that they're not going to be able to reproduce anymore. That's not going to stop them, right? Though they still could have that threat of the rumbling, right, till the end. But even then, you would have to make sure, or you would need to maintain some sort of royal blood titan and then a founding titan, right till the end, to have that possibility in place, the possibility of this stampede of the titans. And then there's the other option, right? I mentioned the lesser of the two evils earlier in my discussion, but I'll get into that in a bit because first I need to get into the meeting with Eren, right, in Liberio. Finally, I get to see the conversation they had back in Liberio, right, or at least one of the conversations. Notice how he mentions that Eren is starting to resemble father, and Eren had that similar look as Grisha at the dinner table, right? I thought it was a similar look. There's some emotional manipulation going on here as well, right? Much like the table scene with Armin and Mikasa. essentially he was telling Zeke all the right things, right? And, openly telling him that Grisha was wrong and that I, the son that he raised, was also wrong. These are things that Zeke needed to hear, and these are things that Eren made sure to say to Zeke. And he proceeds to also call him brother. And, in that moment, Zeke got quite emotional because he felt that he finally found the individual Ksaver-san had mentioned, right? Find someone who you can trust, someone who understands this plan of ours. And you see that even Ksaver-san is careful about this, right? Because as he told Zeke, you're just the key, right? You're the key, but the founding titan, or the powers of the founding titan, isn't his to use, right? But the holder's, and the holder is Eren Yeager. So trust plays a major part here, and it appears that Eren played his part to gain some of that trust, or gain a lot of trust with Zeke. So yeah, there's certainly some emotional manipulation going on here, and you know how there was that notion that Eren is being manipulated by Zeke. No. Yeah, Eren's the one doing the manipulating here. And now this is 2 episodes running that Eren has shown to be manipulative, be it to protect his friends, perhaps, by pushing them out, by essentially hurting them. And then once again in this episode with Zeke, right? I mean, come on, he's clearly playing along. I mean, you would have to toss out his entire characterization at this point, right? To even believe him here. It would be character assassination, essentially, right? There's no greater salvation than never being born in this world. That's literally the opposite of everything Eren stands for, everything he's fighting for, right? Mr. Tatakai himself, holder of the Shingeki no Kyojin, always seeking freedom. I move forward until my enemies are destroyed. There's nothing here that could potentially validate this sudden change in philosophy, right? Zeke is being used once again, as the key, as a royal holder of a titan, much like he was, being used as a tool at a young age by his own father, right, Grisha. So a bit of dramatic irony has been introduced, right, in the Eren-Zeke dynamic, because now us, the audience, knows more than the character, more than Zeke. They have now shown us that Eren is not being truthful with Zeke, right? But Zeke wholeheartedly believes Eren is by his side and that they do see eye to eye, right? And, now it's created this potential dreaded moment for Zeke, or of Zeke discovering what the audience already knows, right? And again, I can only speak for myself, but there is compassion for Zeke in this moment as he is heading for disaster. But now let's circle back to that other option I mentioned, right? Now that I've gone into my thoughts on that meeting of Eren and Zeke and the things they kind of say to each other there. Now the other option, and the likely one as well, given that I don't believe for a second that Eren has all of a sudden changed this much, right? The stampede of the Titans, and that could certainly result in genocide, right? On a global stage. At a global level, right, or scale, and that's as dark as it gets. And something like that could certainly turn Eren into the final threat of the story, and they've already kind of alluded to that. You go back to episode 10, as they are starting to go into that possibility of them having to cut down Eren if need be. But this other option, right, the stampede of the Titans, the rumbling, essentially, that would certainly be quite the apocalyptic situation, right? And again, that takes me back to my season 3, episode 7 discussion. I remember all that time ago saying that even if a small selection of these colossal titans got out from the walls, it could be quite the apocalyptic situation. And the staggering thing is that this could actually happen. This is actually quite likely, because I just don't think for one second that he is going to go along with Zeke's plan, right? I just don't think that. But, imagine that type of ending. It would actually come full circle, right? And that fake narrative that was set up in the beginning of the series, that all of humanity has perished outside of the walls and the last remaining humans, right, or people are just inside the walls, that could actually become true. And, again, that takes you back to something Flock said, right? A victory in the form of the rumbling, and that, secures our right to live. And before I sign off, there's one more thing I wanted to touch up on. Upon finding out that Eren is the current holder of the Founding Titan, and of course this is Reiner and Bertolt giving him this intel, he had quite a breakdown in his room, didn't he, right? The trauma of his childhood kind of came rushing back in that moment. He had his head in his hands, just like that time Grisha was yelling, right? And screaming. He truly believed that this Eren Yeager might have been put through the same things he had to experience with that father, right? That father. You can see that he was quite upset over the idea of another child. And, this one being his half-brother might be experiencing the same trauma and brainwashing he experienced, right? Now, of course, Zeke had no way of knowing that Grisha did have regrets and that he learned from those mistakes and he treated Eren differently, right? But Zeke he didn't know this, right? So, again, going back to the conclusion of the Battle of Shiganshina arc, he genuinely believed that, Eren might have been brainwashed, and he meant it, that he is going to come back to rescue him at some point. I mean, listen, man, this whole paths stuff and the transcending space and time, that whole aspect is still quite a mystery, right? Yes, they've given me some things about it, but, it is a mystery for the most part. But if it was at all possible to have some sort of Grisha and Zeke interaction, similar to Cooper and Murph from Interstellar, I think that could be quite powerful. I think that could be quite an important moment for this story, a powerful moment for this story. Him potentially knowing that indeed that father did have regrets. Maybe it could give him some sort of, or some semblance of closure on that front. But yeah, that aspect of it is still shrouded in mystery, right? And there's only one episode left. So I'll have to wait for part 2 to get more, to learn more about these paths, right? And like I've said a few times now, I'm actually so interested in seeing how coming in contact with Eren is going to change things for Zeke. Given that he is a royal holder of a Titan, right? And they've already shown us that he is able to control some aspect of it and that he is dialed into some of this because he does, use that. He does utilize these paths to, create his pure Titans, right? So exciting stuff. But again, there's only one episode left. So anything that goes into that is probably going to have to wait till part 2 of this, right? So yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm excited. So yeah, that's about it for this episode. It's an incredible episode. It's the best of the season. It's one of the best of the series. Easily top 3, top 2. It's a strong contender for episode of the series as well, to be honest. It's right up there, right? So yeah, that's about it. Right then, episode 15. Incredible. It's one of the absolute best episodes of the series. Just, so good. It's a phenomenal episode. And if you did enjoy it, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts. And if you really do enjoy the content and you're not subscribed at the moment, consider subscribing to the channel and helping the channel grow and reach new heights and, help other Shingeki fans find these and help in spreading this type of reaction content. If you're interested in early access or perhaps full length for this episode, consider checking out the Patreon page. Please remember, it's only an option for anyone who's interested in content beyond the scheduled content. If you are, the link is in the description and in the pinned comment. And once again, a reminder, the show must go on. Yes, Shingeki is about to wrap up, part 1, that is, but the show must go on. So there is going to be a replacement for Fridays, and it's going to be Vinland Saga. Really quite excited about that. And also, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is also coming in May. So yeah, there's a lot of options coming in. But like I said in the intro, I get that, some people are here only for Shingeki. I mean, that's totally cool, right? That's totally fine. People have preferences, and if this is the only thing you like on the channel, then yeah, thank you for joining me for part 1 of this, and I hope to see you again soon for part 2. Well, I mean, not soon, but you know what I mean. I'll see you for part 2, hopefully. Right then, that's about it for this one. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope to see you again soon for the final episode of part 1. So until then, take it easy.